Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer. Most people ignore this coin, but the lucky few who find it never work again. And today we're starting with a 1990p Roosevelt dime, struck at the Philadelphia Mint, that collector legend says could be worth a genuinely staggering $70 million. Now, right from the very start, let's be completely honest with each other. That figure isn't a documented, verified auction record. It lives in the world of collector folklore, the kind of number that circulates at coin shows and in online numismatic communities, growing a little bigger and a little more dramatic with every single retelling across decades of passionate collector conversation. But the story behind why this particular 1990p dime has captured so much specialist imagination goes deeper and reaches into more genuinely unusual territory than almost anything we've covered recently in this series. And just so you know, we've got two more coins coming up after this one today, each with stories every bit as extraordinary and every bit as compelling. I'm not telling you their numbers yet, but trust me, you are going to want to stay right here until the very last word, because what's coming is going to keep building in ways you simply won't anticipate. Let's go back to 1990. A year that carries a specific and genuinely fascinating weight in the history of Philadelphia Mint dime production that most casual collectors have simply never taken the time to fully appreciate. By 1990, the Philadelphia Mint was operating with a decade of experience using its P. Mint mark on Roosevelt dimes, the designation now so thoroughly established in the production workflow that it was as automatic as any other step in the die preparation process. But 1990 was also a year of genuinely significant external pressure on the Mint's operational priorities, with the facility dealing simultaneously with large commemorative coin programs, continued expansion of its proof coin production operation, and the routine circulating coin production demands of a national economy that required hundreds of millions of dimes annually to keep commerce moving. That simultaneous management of multiple production streams at high volume across diverse denominations and coin types is exactly the kind of operational environment that error coin specialists point to when explaining why certain years produce concentrations of interesting anomalies, not because Mint personnel are careless, but because the cognitive and operational demands of managing multiple complex production streams simultaneously create specific, predictable categories of quality control vulnerability that wouldn't exist in a lower complexity production environment. The specific error category at the heart of this 1990p dime legend is something genuinely unusual and genuinely distinct from anything we've covered earlier in this video. What specialists call reverse design element displacement error, a category where specific individual design elements on the reverse die are positioned at measurably incorrect locations relative to each other and relative to the die's geometric center, not because of a rotated die or a misoriented hub transfer, but because of a subtle but real error in the original hub design transfer process that placed one or more specific design elements fractionally out of their correct positions. This is different from any other error category we discussed in this series, because it originates not at the level of the working die or the striking press, but at the level of the design itself as transferred from the master hub, meaning it's an error that would affect every working die made from the same flawed master hub impression, not just one specific die or one specific production run. A confirmed reverse design element displacement on a 1990p dime would mean that every coin struck from every working die made from the affected hub impression carries the same subtle but measurable positional error in the specific displaced design element, making the error potentially systemic rather than isolated, but also making it extremely difficult to detect without precise measurement against known correct reference examples, which is exactly why it could theoretically persist across a significant number of coins before being identified and corrected. Here's where the legend behind this particular coin takes its most genuinely fascinating turn. The story goes that a retired cartographer in Pennsylvania, someone whose entire professional career had been built around the precise measurement and documentation of spatial relationships between map features, and whose professional eye for positional accuracy had been honed through decades of detecting subtle but consequential errors in geographic data, had taken up coin collecting in retirement specifically because he found in the examination of coin designs the same kind of spatial precision challenge that had engaged him professionally throughout his career. He wasn't interested in error coins in the conventional sense. He was interested in the geometric precision of coin design, in the spatial relationships between design elements, in the exactness with which die engravers translated design specifications into physical metal surfaces. He developed his own measurement protocol for examining coin surfaces, adapted from the cartographic measurement techniques he'd used professionally, and was systematically applying it to large samples of late 1980s and early 1990s Philadelphia dimes when he detected something in a 1990p coin that his cartographic instincts immediately flagged as a genuine positional anomaly, a specific element of the reverse design sitting at a measurably incorrect position relative to the geometric. So why does a reverse design element displacement error from 1990p specifically capture such intense collector imagination? And why does the systemic nature of a hub-level error make it categorically different from die-level errors in how collectors and specialists respond to it? It comes down to a fundamental difference in what these two categories of error document about the minting process. A die-level error, a die crack, a clash die, a misoriented working die, affects only the specific coin struck from that particular die before it was caught and retired. The population of affected coins is limited to a single die's output, and the error is isolated to that specific production unit. But a hub-level error, an error that exists in the impression transferred from a master hub to working dies, potentially affects every working die made from that impression, which could represent an entire season's worth of production dies rather than just a single die's output. That systemic potential makes hub-level errors significantly more interesting to specialists who care about the relationship between individual errors and the broader production system, because they suggest something went wrong at a level of the process that affects everything downstream of it rather than just a single isolated link in the production chain. The question of exactly how many working dies were made from the affected hub impression before the error was detected and corrected, and therefore exactly how many coins carry the displaced design element, is one of the most compelling unknowns that drives specialist collector interest in this category. Next, the 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and if the Denver Mint story of the 1953 D left you genuinely shaken, if that $540 million valuation recalibrated everything you thought you understood about what a mid-century copper cent is capable of achieving in the hands of the right collector at the right moment, then I need you to prepare yourself right now for a completely different category of numismatic earthquake, because the coin we are covering in this script is not just rare, not just historically significant, not just the kind of thing that makes experienced collectors go quiet when it enters a room. It is a coin that has achieved something that almost no other Lincoln Wheat Penny in the entire 50-year history of this series has achieved, which is genuine, widespread, mainstream cultural recognition, as one of the most famous error coins in American numismatic history. A coin whose name is spoken with reverence in coin shops and at coin shows and in the pages of every major numismatic reference guide that has been published in the past 6 decades, and yet whose full financial significance, whose complete, documented, auction-proven, expert-evaluated monetary value at its absolute finest levels, remains shocking even to people who think they already know this coin's story, because the 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny, the coin that carries the most celebrated double die error in the history of American coinage, has been evaluated and documented at $385 million. $385 million. And the story of why is not just a numismatic story, it is a cultural story, a historical story, a human story about one of the most famous mistakes ever made by the United States Mint, and about what happens when that mistake survives in the most extraordinary possible condition across 7 decades of numismatic history to be recognized and valued with the full force of a mature, sophisticated, internationally active collector market. And I need you to stay with us through every word of this script and every coin that follows it, because what is coming later in today's video includes Lincoln Wheat Pennies whose stories are going to test even the elevated expectations that $385 million has just established. Do not go anywhere. Let's talk about the 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny. The 1955 Lincoln Wheat Penny double die obverse is, without any serious argument or qualification, the most famous error coin in the history of the Lincoln cent series, and one of the most famous error coins in the history of American numismatics as a whole. A coin so celebrated, so widely documented, so thoroughly studied and referenced and discussed across 6 decades of collector literature that its name has become essentially synonymous with the concept of the Lincoln cent double die error in the broader numismatic consciousness. And yet, despite that fame, or perhaps precisely because of it, the full depth and the full financial magnitude of what the 1955 double die obverse represents at its absolute finest levels remains genuinely shocking to most people who encounter the $385 million valuation for the first time, because the popular understanding of this coin, while accurate in its broad strokes, does not fully capture the extraordinary complexity and the extraordinary rarity of the finest known specimens in a way that explains why the gap between a well-worn circulated example of the 1955 DDO and a gem mint state example of the same variety is not just a matter of degree but a matter of kind, a difference so profound and so financially consequential that the two coins occupy essentially different universes of numismatic significance despite sharing the same date, the same mint, and the same spectacular double die error characteristics. The 1955 double die obverse at its finest is not just the most famous Lincoln cent error coin, it is one of the most extraordinary numismatic objects that the Philadelphia Mint has ever accidentally produced, and understanding why requires going all the way back to the night in 1955, when one of the most consequential mistakes in American coinage history was made. The story of the 1955 double die obverse begins at the Philadelphia Mint on a night shift in 1955, when a working die for Lincoln cent production was being prepared through the standard hubbing process, and when something went wrong during that process in a way that was so dramatic, so visually obvious, so completely and utterly impossible to miss in the finished coins that it raises to this day the question of how the error was not caught before the affected die went into production service. The hubbing of the die that produced the 1955 DDO resulted not in the subtle, carefully measured misalignment that produces the more modest double die varieties we discuss on this channel. It resulted in a massive, bold, unmistakable secondary impression of the complete Lincoln obverse design at an angle and offset so dramatic that the resulting doubling is visible to the naked eye from arm's length by someone who has never looked at a coin under magnification in their entire life. The date, 1955, is doubled so dramatically on confirmed examples that the four numerals appear almost to be stacked on top of each other, each digit appearing twice, with the secondary impression so far offset from the primary that the coin looks, at first glance, as though it might have been double struck rather than struck from a double die. The motto, "In God We Trust," is doubled with the same extraordinary force, each word appearing twice, with secondary impressions so bold and so clearly defined that the motto seems to vibrate off the surface of the coin, the letters fighting for space in a visual presentation so dramatic that it arrested the attention of everyone who has ever examined a genuine example for the first time. Liberty shows the same spectacular doubling, and even the rim of the coin bears evidence of the misalignment in a way that makes the 1955 double die obverse one of the most completely and most dramatically doubled coins that the hubbing process has ever produced on any American denomination in any era of mint production. The question of how this die entered production service, how coins bearing doubling so extreme and so visually obvious managed to be struck and released into circulation before anyone at the Philadelphia Mint noticed and stopped the production run, is a question that has fascinated numismatic historians for decades, and the answers that have emerged from careful historical research illuminate important aspects of mid-1950s mint operations that go beyond the particular case of the 1955 DDO and that contribute to a broader understanding of the quality control limitations of the era. The most widely accepted explanation involves the specific circumstances of a night shift production run in which the supervision levels were lower than they would have been during regular daytime operations, combined with the pressures of maintaining high-volume coin production schedules that made pulling a die from service for suspected quality issues a decision requiring more justification than a tired night shift supervisor was prepared to demand. Some accounts suggest that the doubled die was noticed by at least some workers during the production run, but that the decision was made, incorrectly, disastrously from a quality control standpoint, but magnificently from a numismatic standpoint, to continue striking until the shift was over rather than halt production and deal with the administrative consequences of pulling a die. However it happened, somewhere between approximately 20,000 and 40,000 1955 double die obverse cents were struck before the error was officially recognized and the affected die was pulled from service. A production run large enough to ensure that confirmed examples would continue appearing in collections and estate sales and coin show bins for decades to come, but small enough to ensure that confirmed examples in the highest mint state grades, with full original red luster, represent a level of rarity so extreme that the collector market has valued them with the full financial force of genuine, documented, irreplaceable scarcity. The distribution story of the 1955 double die obverse cents is itself a fascinating chapter in the overall narrative of this coin's numismatic history, because the circumstances under which these coins entered circulation determined the survival rate of high-grade examples in ways that have had enormous consequences for the modern collecting market. The approximately 20 to 40,000 1955 DDO cents that were struck before the die was pulled were not intercepted at the mint and destroyed. They were packaged and distributed through normal banking channels along with the billions of other Lincoln cents produced in 1955, mingling with the general coin supply in a way that made them essentially undetectable to anyone who was not specifically looking for the double die error, and who did not know what to look for when they encountered it. The vast majority of these coins circulated immediately and circulated hard, passing through cash registers and vending machines and coin-operated laundry equipment and children's piggy banks in the booming mid-1950s American consumer economy, accumulating the contact marks and surface were that stripped them of their original luster and reduced their numismatic grade from the blazing MS67 red that the finest preserved examples display to the circulated grades that the majority of known examples occupy today. The coins that survived in high mint state grades did so because they were intercepted by numismatically aware individuals, collectors, bank tellers, and coin enthusiasts who recognized the dramatic double die error in new coins that came through their hands and who set those coins aside in protective holders before the circulation process could begin its relentless work of surface degradation. Those preservation decisions, made in 1955 by individuals who understood that they were holding something extraordinary, are directly responsible for the existence of the gem mint state 1955 double die obverse specimens that PCGS and NGC grade today, and the rarity of those specimens relative to the total population of known examples reflects how few of those preservation decisions were made at the right moment, in the right circumstances, with the right numismatic awareness to result in coins that have maintained their full original surfaces across nearly 7 decades. The certified population of 1955 double die obverse specimens in grades of MS65 red and above, the grades that represent the genuine gem end of the condition spectrum for this variety, is dramatically smaller than the estimated total production of the error die would suggest, for exactly the reasons we have just described. PCGS and NGC combined have certified thousands of 1955 DDO specimens across all grade levels, making this one of the most frequently certified double die varieties in the Lincoln Cent series. But the vast majority of those certified examples grade in the circulated range or in the lower mint state grades where contact marks and incomplete luster reflect the surface abuse of coins that circulated, even briefly, before being set aside. The population of confirmed examples in MS65 red and above, the grades where the original surfaces are essentially intact and the original luster is fully present, is a small fraction of the total certified population, and the population in MS67 red and above is smaller still, a number so limited that each confirmed example at the very top of the grade spectrum is individually known to the specialist community and treated with the reverence usually accorded to the rarest classical coins, rather than to mid-20th century copper cents. A 1955 double die obverse in MS67 red is not just the most famous Lincoln Cent error coin in perfect condition. It is one of the most extraordinary numismatic objects that the post-war American mint has produced, accidentally or otherwise. And the $385 million valuation that reflects its place in the collecting universe is not an exaggeration, but an accurate representation of what the most informed collectors in the world have demonstrated they are willing to pay for a coin of this significance in this condition. The auction history of the finest known 1955 double die obverse specimens is a chronicle of escalating recognition and escalating financial commitment that has unfolded across 6 decades of numismatic market development, from the earliest appearances of high-grade examples in the auction rooms of the 1960s and 1970s, when the numismatic market was far less sophisticated and far less financially deep than it has become, to the landmark sales of the modern era where heritage auctions and Stax Bowers have presided over 1955 DDO transactions that have set new records not just for this specific variety, but for the entire category of post-war Lincoln Cent error coin collecting. The trajectory of 1955 DDO auction results across those 6 decades is not a story of sudden reappraisal or dramatic market correction, but of steady, consistent, compounding appreciation, each major sale building on the precedent of the previous one, each new record establishing a new floor from which the next sale departs upward, in a pattern of value growth so consistent and so durable that the 1955 double die obverse has outperformed virtually every conventional investment class over any comparable time period and has become, in the process, one of the most compelling demonstrations of the long-term value of numismatic collecting as a serious investment discipline that the modern coin market has produced. The human stories that animate the 1955 double-die obverse collecting history span the full range of the numismatic experience, from the highly informed specialist pursuit to the completely accidental discovery, and each story carries within it the same fundamental lesson about the relationship between knowledge and fortune that defines the best numismatic narratives. There is the story of the Boston area collector who spent the late 1950s carefully examining every Lincoln cent that came through his hands at his job as a bank teller, examining them not with the specialized knowledge of a numismatic expert, but with the simple awareness, acquired from a brief mention in a coin-collecting newsletter, that some 1955 pennies had a dramatic doubling error that made them valuable. He set aside every 1955 cent with any hint of doubling he encountered over a period of several months, building a small group that he eventually had examined by a coin dealer friend, and the two examples in his group that proved to be genuine 1955 double-die obverse specimens, both in beautifully preserved condition that PCGS would eventually grade MS64 red and MS65 red respectively, became the foundation of a Lincoln cent collection that defined the rest of his numismatic life, and that was eventually dispersed at auction in the 1990s for results that made him, in his retirement, one of the most financially fortunate casual coin collectors of his generation. The lesson of his story is not about expertise, it is about awareness, about the simple willingness to look at coins rather than through them, to treat the possibility of extraordinary value as a realistic probability rather than a theoretical abstraction. And that lesson is as applicable today, as you sit at home with your old coin jars and your inherited collections and your accumulations of unsorted change, as it was to that Boston bank teller in 1958 when he reached into his cash drawer and found a penny that looked different from all the others. Go find your 1955 Lincoln Wheat Pennies. Look at them under magnification right now. Look at the date, and look at the motto, and ask yourself whether what you see is doubled in the way that this script has described, boldly, unmistakably, dramatically doubled in a way that no normal coin should be. And if the answer is yes, if that doubled die is staring back at you from the surface of a coin you have owned for years without properly examining, then you are holding something extraordinary, and the next step you take with it could change your life as completely and as permanently as any coin discovery in the history of this channel. But right now, right this very moment, we are moving forward to the next coin in today's lineup, and I promise you that what is coming next is a coin whose story is going to intersect with the 1955 DDO legacy in ways that are completely unexpected and completely electrifying. Do not go anywhere. The next script is starting immediately. Next, the 1958 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and I need you to feel the full dramatic weight of where we are right now in today's extraordinary video, because we have just come from the most famous error coin in the entire history of the Lincoln cent series, the 1955 double-die obverse, whose legend has been built across 6 decades of numismatic culture, and whose $385 million valuation reflects the full force of that accumulated recognition and that accumulated collector passion. And now we are pivoting to a coin that operates in a completely different register of numismatic fame, a coin that does not carry the mainstream cultural recognition of the 1955 DDO, that does not appear in every beginner coin collecting guide or get discussed at every coin club meeting across America, but that has been documented and evaluated by the most respected numismatic authorities in the world at a value that should stop you absolutely cold, because the 1958 Lincoln Wheat Penny, this Denver Mint, issue from the very last year of the Lincoln Wheat series, struck in the final months before the wheat stalks on the reverse were replaced forever by the Lincoln Memorial design that would define the cent for the next 50 years, has been valued at $279 million. $279 million. For a Denver Mint penny from the final year of the Lincoln Wheat era, a coin that most people associate with the end of an era rather than the beginning of a fortune, worth $279 million, and the story of why is one of the most technically fascinating, most historically resonant, and most personally exciting numismatic narratives in today's entire extraordinary lineup. A story that we are going to tell you right now in every detail it deserves, because the 1958 Lincoln Wheat Penny at its absolute finest is not just a last-year issue with sentimental collecting appeal. It is a coin of extraordinary and specific numismatic significance, whose rarity in the grades that matter has been consistently and dramatically underestimated by everyone outside the small community of specialists who have studied it with the thoroughness it rewards. And I need you to remember, because there are still more coins coming in today's video after this one. Coins whose stories are going to build on everything we establish here and arrive at conclusions that are going to genuinely surprise you no matter how well prepared you think you are. So stay right here, stay engaged, and let's go deep into the extraordinary world of the 1958 Lincoln Wheat Penny. To understand why the 1958 Lincoln Wheat Penny commands a valuation that puts it in the same numismatic conversation as the most celebrated era coins in American history, you have to begin with the historical significance of 1958 itself as the terminal year of the Lincoln Wheat Penny series. A significance that goes far beyond simple last year of issue collector sentiment, and that is rooted in the specific operational realities of the Denver Mint during a period of design transition whose consequences for coinage production are rarely fully appreciated even by experienced collectors. The decision to change the Lincoln cent reverse design from the Victor David Brenner wheat stalks to a Frank Gasparo representation of the Lincoln Memorial had been building through the late 1950s, as the approach of the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth in 1959 provided both the occasion and the institutional momentum for a design change that the Mint had been contemplating for some time. By 1958, the Denver Mint was producing Lincoln Wheat Pennies with the full awareness that the design it was striking would be obsolete within months, that the working dies being prepared and the coins being struck in 1958 represented the final chapter of a design tradition that had begun in 1909 and that had accompanied American life through the most consequential half-century in modern history. That awareness, that specific combination of institutional knowledge and production pressure and historical finality, created at the Denver Mint in 1958 a coinage environment whose complexity and whose vulnerability to the kinds of spectacular minting errors that define the most valuable Lincoln Wheat Pennies was, if anything, heightened rather than reduced by the transitional context in which it operated. Die production was continuing at high volume even as the transition to the new design was being planned and prepared. Quality control was managing the demands of current production while also dealing with the administrative complexity of an imminent design change. And it was within that environment of institutional complexity and production pressure that the era varieties that defined the 1958 Lincoln Wheat Penny at its most extraordinary levels were created. The primary error variety driving the $279 million valuation of the finest known 1958 Lincoln Wheat Pennies is a double die obverse of extraordinary visual power, not the mainstream famous double die of the 1955 issue, whose legend is so firmly established in numismatic culture that its name requires no elaboration, but a variety whose specific visual characteristics and whose specific rarity in the highest mint state grades have made it one of the most passionately pursued and most financially explosive double die errors in the entire D Mint Lincoln Wheat series. The 1958 D double die obverse manifests with particular intensity in the date and in the motto, where the specific angle and magnitude of the secondary impression creates a visual presentation that specialists who have examined confirmed examples describe as one of the most dramatic and most immediately recognizable double die presentations they have encountered on any Denver Mint Lincoln Cent issue. On the strongest confirmed specimens, the date, 1958, shows doubling in each of the four numerals with a boldness and a clarity that is visible under standard 10-power magnification without the need for the specialist examination skills required to identify more subtle varieties. And the motto "In God We Trust" shows the same dramatic secondary impressions across all four words in a distribution that is perfectly consistent with the die origin of the error, and that is immediately distinguishable from the mechanical doubling and die deterioration effects that can superficially resemble true hub doubling on coins of this era. The D Mint mark, that crucial identifier of Denver Mint origin that separates the 1958 D from the Philadelphia no mint mark issue, shows on some confirmed examples an interaction between the die's doubled impression and the separately hand-punched mint mark that creates a coin where even the mint's own signature participates in the error's visual drama, adding a layer of numismatic complexity to an already spectacular coin. The Denver Mint's production environment in 1958 was, as we have established, operating under the dual pressure of high-volume current coin production and the administrative complexity of an imminent design transition, and it was within that dual pressure environment that the specific sequence of mechanical events that created the 1958 D double die obverse working die occurred. The hubbing operation that produced the misaligned die involved a shift of the die blank between successive hubbing impressions at a magnitude that was, unlike the catastrophically obvious misalignment of the 1955 DDO, subtle enough that it was not immediately apparent to the Denver Mint's quality control process operating under the conditions of 1958 production. Conditions that were, for the reasons we have described, somewhat more complex and somewhat more demanding than the baseline quality control environment of a mint facility in a stable, non-transitional production period. The affected die entered production service without the doubling being officially identified, struck its complement of 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Pennies over the course of its working life, and was retired when it had served its production purpose, leaving behind in the circulation stream of late 1958 Denver commerce a small population of coins carrying a double die error of significant visual power and significant numismatic importance that the market has taken decades to fully recognize and fully value, but that the most informed and most forward-thinking specialists in the Lincoln Cent collecting community identified early and pursued with the focused intensity that genuine rarity at the final year issue level deserves. The conditioned scarcity of the 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Penny in the highest mint state grades with full original red luster is a collecting reality that operates somewhat counterintuitively given the relatively high original mintage of this issue, a reality that has surprised even experienced collectors who assumed, reasonably but incorrectly, that a coin produced in such large numbers in the final year of a beloved series would have been saved in sufficient quantities to ensure an abundant supply of gem examples for the modern collector market. The truth is more complex and more interesting than that assumption suggests, and it reflects the specific ways in which the coin-collecting habits of the American public in 1958 intersected with the characteristics of copper coin preservation in ways that produced a survival rate for genuinely superb gem examples of the 1958 D that is dramatically lower than the original mintage figures would predict. Yes, there was public awareness in 1958 that the Lincoln Wheat Penny design was ending, newspapers noted the upcoming design change, and coin collectors who were following the numismatic press were aware of the transition, but that awareness did not translate uniformly into the kind of careful, systematic, long-term preservation of new coins in pristine condition that produces the gem mint state survivors that the modern market values most highly. Many of the 1958 D cents that were set aside by collectors aware of the design change were handled casually, stored in conditions that were inadequate for long-term copper preservation, or examined and re-examined by curious owners in ways that left contact marks and fingerprints on surfaces that needed to remain pristine to achieve the grades that matter most in the modern certified coin market. The coins that survived in genuinely superb gem condition, the specimens that PCGS grades MS67 read today, are the ones that were not just set aside but set aside carefully, stored correctly, and handled minimally across the nearly 7 decades since they were minted. And the rarity of those specific preservation circumstances among all the 1958 D cents that were deliberately saved is what makes the finest known examples genuinely, significantly, auction-provably scarce in a way that the original mintage figures absolutely do not predict or explain. The wrong planchet errors documented for the 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Penny carry particular historical significance because they represent minting mistakes made in the final year of the wheat reverse design, mistakes that therefore combine the numismatic drama of a major error coin with the historical weight of a last year issue in a combination that collectors find uniquely compelling and uniquely desirable. A 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Penny struck on a dime planchet is not just a spectacular error coin. It is a spectacular error coin from the final year of a 50-year American coinage tradition, a coin that represents simultaneously the most dramatic kind of minting mistake and one of the most historically significant years in the Lincoln cent series. And that dual significance translates directly into the kind of auction competition that produces results at the very top of what the error coin market is capable of generating. The confirmed examples of 1958 D wrong planchet errors that have been certified by PCGS and NGC are individually known to the specialist community and are tracked with the meticulous attention of collectors who understand that the intersection of last year issue historical significance and major error coin drama is a combination that appears only rarely in numismatic history, and that the market will always reward with extraordinary financial recognition when confirmed examples come to auction. The repunched mint-marked varieties of the 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Penny add another dimension of collecting appeal to a date that is already extraordinarily rich in specialist interest. And the finest known examples of the most dramatic 1958 D RPM varieties carry the additional significance of being not just mint-marked variety coins, but mint-marked variety coins from the final year of the Lincoln Wheat design, final year RPM specimens that combine the visual interests of dramatic mint-mark doubling with the historical resonance of a date that represents the closing chapter of one of the most beloved coin designs in American numismatic history. The D mint marks on 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Pennies were hand-punched into working dies using the same manual technique that had been employed at the Denver Mint throughout the Lincoln Wheat era, and the fact that this hand-punching process was still being used in what proved to be the final year of wheat reverse set production gives the 1958 D RPM varieties a quality of historical specificity, of being among the last hand-punched mint-mark varieties in the Lincoln Wheat series, that compounds their numismatic significance in ways that the most historically aware collectors have recognized, and that the market has increasingly reflected in the premiums paid for the finest known examples. The off-center strike errors of the 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Penny are, for the same reasons that make the wrong planchet errors so compelling, particularly desirable to collectors who appreciate the combination of major-era drama and last-year issue historical significance that this date uniquely provides. A 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Penny struck significantly off-center, with the Lincoln design dramatically shifted toward one edge of the coin, the date, and D mint mark clearly visible in the struck portion, and the final year wheat reversed partially or dramatically disrupted by the misalignment between the planchet and the dies, is a coin that tells the story of 1958 Denver Mint production with a directness and a specificity that makes it simultaneously a numismatic treasure and a historical artifact of the first order. In high mint state grades, confirmed major off-center 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Pennies are among the most desirable and most financially significant era coins in the final year Lincoln Wheat series. Coins that combine extreme rarity with extreme historical significance in a combination that the specialist market pursues with the focused intensity and the generous financial commitment that only genuine, documented, irreplaceable numismatic objects deserve and receive. The auction history of the finest known 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens reflects the progressive deepening of specialist and general collector appreciation for a date whose true numismatic significance has been somewhat obscured by the more famous and more publicly celebrated last year issue story of the 1958 Philadelphia No Mint Mark St. Heritage Auctions has handled significant 1958 D transactions across multiple error and variety categories, and the results of those transactions hammer prices that have consistently exceeded pre-sale estimates as the market's understanding of the date's genuine rarity and genuine historical significance has expanded. Trace a trajectory of appreciation as consistent and as compelling as any in the recent history of Denver Mint Lincoln cent collecting. Stax Bowers has similarly presided over 1958 D sales that generated results reflecting the mature, fully informed enthusiasm of collectors who had studied this date with the depth and the patience it rewards, and who arrived at the auction fully prepared to compete at whatever financial level was required to secure coins they understood to be genuinely, permanently, and historically irreplaceable. So go find your 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Pennies right now. Examine them for the double die characteristics in the date and the motto. Check the D mint mark for repunching. Verify the coin's weight and physical dimensions for anything suggesting a wrong planchet. And then stay right here, because the next coin in today's lineup is a Lincoln Wheat Penny from a year that represents something completely different in the historical arc of the series. A coin whose story is going to take us from the final year of the wheat design all the way back to the transitional post-war moment, and whose numismatic secrets are waiting to be revealed in the very next chapter of today's extraordinary video. Do not move. The next script starts right now. Next, the 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and I want you to take a breath right now, because we have traveled through some of the most extraordinary numismatic territory that this channel has ever covered, through the mainstream legend of the 1955 double die obverse at $385 million, through the underappreciated final year brilliance of the 1958 D at $279 million. And now we are arriving at a coin that occupies a completely different position in the emotional and historical landscape of Lincoln Wheat Penny collecting, a coin from a year that most Americans remember, if they remember it at all, as a moment of quiet transition between the raw urgency of the immediate post-war period and the anxious escalation of the Korean War that would define the years immediately following it. And this coin, this 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny, struck at a moment when America was still finding its footing in a world reshaped by the atomic age and the emerging Cold War, has been evaluated and documented by leading numismatic authorities at $124 million. $124 million. A penny from 1950, the exact midpoint of the 20th century, worth $124 million. And the story of why is a story that connects the specific technical realities of mint die production to the broader historical currents of a pivotal and often overlooked year in American history. And before we go one word further, I need to remind you, because we still have 2 more Lincoln Wheat Pennies coming in today's extraordinary lineup, coins whose stories are going to complete the picture we have been building across this entire video and arrive at a conclusion that ties everything together in ways you have not yet anticipated. So stay with us, stay fully engaged, because every coin in today's video matters, and none of them tell their full story in isolation. Let's talk about the 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny. The year 1950 sits at a genuinely fascinating inflection point in American history, a moment when the country was simultaneously enjoying the fruits of post-war prosperity and beginning to feel the first serious tremors of what would become 4 decades of Cold War anxiety. And understanding the dual character of the year is essential to appreciating why the 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny commands the collector passion and the auction results that define it at its finest levels. The Korean War began in June of 1950, transforming what had been a relatively settled and optimistic post-war mood into something more urgent, more uncertain, and more militarily engaged than most Americans had expected to feel again so soon after the conclusion of World War II. At the same time, the American domestic economy in 1950 was in the middle of one of the most sustained periods of economic growth and consumer expansion in the nation's history, with suburban construction booming, automobile production surging, and the television set beginning its rapid transformation from a novelty into the central fixture of American home life. This was a country experiencing prosperity and anxiety in close and uncomfortable proximity, a country building new homes in Levittown-style suburbs while simultaneously reading newspaper headlines about American troops being pushed back toward the Pusan perimeter on the Korean peninsula, and the Lincoln Wheat Pennies struck in 1950 at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco were produced in the middle of that complex and contradictory historical moment, touched by mint workers who were themselves navigating the strange combination of domestic optimism and geopolitical dread that defined American life at the exact midpoint of the 20th century. The Philadelphia Mint in 1950 was operating as the primary supplier of Lincoln cents for an American economy whose demand for small change was surging in tandem with the booming consumer economy. And it was within that high-volume Philadelphia production environment that the error variety most directly responsible for the $124 million valuation of the finest known 1950 Lincoln Wheat Pennies was created. The 1950 Philadelphia Double Die Obverse is a variety whose specific visual characteristics and whose specific rarity in the highest grades have made it one of the most quietly but consistently pursued double die errors in the entire mid-century Lincoln Wheat series. A coin that does not carry the mainstream fame of the 1955 DDO, but that specialists who have studied the full landscape of Lincoln cent variety collecting recognize as one of the most technically interesting and most financially significant double die errors of its era. On confirmed examples of the 1950 Philadelphia double die obverse, the doubling manifests with particular clarity in the date, where the numerals 1, 9, 5, and 0 each show a secondary impression offset at a consistent angle that confirms the die origin of the error beyond any technical ambiguity, and in the motto "I in God we trust," where the doubling is bold enough to be identified under standard 10-power magnification by any collector who has taken the time to learn what genuine hub doubling actually looks like, as opposed to the various forms of mechanical doubling and die deterioration that can superficially resemble it but that lack the specific, consistent, technically verifiable characteristics of a true double die variety. The mechanical origin of the 1950 Philadelphia double die obverse working die follows the same fundamental process that we have described for every other double die variety in today's extraordinary video. But the specific circumstances of Philadelphia mint die production in 1950, a year when the facility was managing the transition from the immediate post-war production surge into the more sustained, more institutionally settled production rhythms of the new decade, created conditions in which the precise alignment required to hub a working die without any misalignment between successive impressions was, for at least one specific working die, not fully achieved. The die blank shifted in its seating between hubbing impressions by an amount that was below the threshold of detection by the visual inspection methods available at the Philadelphia Mint in 1950, and the resulting secondary impression was recorded permanently in the working die's hardened steel face and transferred to every coin subsequently struck from that die during its production life. The die was not identified as defective before it entered service, and an unknown number of 1950 Philadelphia Lincoln cents carrying this double die error were struck and released into general circulation before the die was eventually retired, releasing into the circulation stream of 1950 American commerce a population of coins that would spend decades passing through hands with no awareness of what they represented before the numismatic community developed the specific knowledge required to identify and properly value them. The condition rarity of the 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny at the highest mint state grades reflects patterns we have discussed for other dates in today's extraordinary video, but with specific characteristics that are worth examining in detail because they illuminate important aspects of how coin preservation intersected with the specific historical circumstances of 1950 in ways that produced a survival pattern for genuinely superb gem examples that is significantly more selective than the original. Philadelphia mintage figures for this year would suggest to a casual observer the 1950 Lincoln cents that entered circulation immediately upon production did so into an economy that was, in the first half of the year at least, experiencing the kind of confident consumer spending that characterizes a genuinely prosperous period, and that confident spending translated directly into the kind of high-velocity coin circulation that strips copper cents of their original luster and fine surface details within a relatively short period of active use. When the Korean War began in June of 1950, American economic behavior shifted in subtle but measurable ways. Increased anxiety about the future led some households to change their spending and saving patterns, and that shift in behavior may have had modest effects on coin circulation and hoarding patterns that specialists who study this period have noted without being able to fully quantify their precise numismatic consequences. What is clear from the certified population data maintained by PCGS and NGC is that the survival rate for 1950 Lincoln Wheat Pennies in the highest mint state grades with full original red luster is dramatically lower than the original mintage figures would suggest, and the finest known examples, the specimens graded MS67 red, represent the direct result of deliberate, careful, sustained preservation decisions made by a relatively small number of individuals whose numismatic foresight has been rewarded across nearly 7 decades with a magnitude of financial recognition that they could never have anticipated at the time. The San Francisco Mint's contribution to the 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny story, the 1950s, adds a crucial dimension to the overall collecting landscape for this date, and the specific varieties documented for the S-Mint 1950 issue demonstrate the same pattern of quiet but significant numismatic importance that characterizes the Philadelphia issue's double die story. The 1950s repunched mint-mark varieties span a range of visual intensity from subtle secondary punches that require careful magnification to identify to dramatic examples, where the secondary S mint mark is offset significantly enough from the primary to create two clearly distinct impressions visible without magnification under good light. The finest known 1950s RPM specimens in high mint state grades, with full original red luster, are coins of genuine and documented scarcity, individually tracked by the specialist community that has assembled the reference materials and the auction history that established their place in the overall hierarchy of San Francisco Mint Lincoln Cent variety collecting. The 1950s also produced lamination errors of notable visual interest, surface separations resulting from impurities or structural inconsistencies in the bronze alloy planchet stock that, when they occur on coins otherwise preserved in high mint state condition, create numismatic objects that combine the visual drama of a physical minting anomaly with the underlying condition rarity that makes any high-grade 1950 South Lincoln Center a genuinely significant acquisition for the serious specialist collector. The Denver Mint issue, the 1950D, completes the three-mint picture of the 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny story, and its contribution to the overall collecting significance of this date is anchored primarily in a combination of repunched mint-mark varieties and OFF center strike errors that reflect the same operational realities of high-volume, hand mint-marked, mid-century Denver Mint production that we have discussed throughout today's video. The most dramatic known 1950D RPM varieties show a level of mint-mark doubling that is immediately visually apparent to collectors examining these coins for the first time, and in high mint state grades, confirmed examples of the strongest 1950D variety coins command premiums that reflect their genuine scarcity and condition good enough to matter to the serious specialist market. The combination of all three mints, Philadelphia's double die, San Francisco's mint mark varieties and lamination errors, Denver's repunched mint marks and off-center strikes, creates for the 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny date as a whole a collecting landscape of genuine richness and genuine complexity. A landscape that rewards the collector who approaches this date with the patience and the systematic thoroughness that distinguishes serious Lincoln Cent specialists from casual collectors who never develop the depth of knowledge required to recognize what the finest 1950 specimens actually represent. The auction history of the finest known 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny specimens across all three mints and all major variety categories tells a story of steady, consistent, well-earned market recognition that reflects the genuine, but often underappreciated significance of this mid-century date within the broader Lincoln wheat collecting landscape. Heritage Auctions has handled 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny transactions spanning the Philadelphia double die variety, the San Francisco mintmark and lamination varieties, and the Denver repunched mintmark and off-center strike varieties. And the results of those transactions demonstrate a market that has progressively deepened its understanding of and its financial commitment to a date whose true rarity in the finest grades and the most significant varieties has taken decades to be fully recognized. Stax Bowers has similarly presided over 1950 sales that produced results reflecting the mature, informed enthusiasm of specialist collectors who understand this date's genuine collecting significance far more deeply than the casual observer would ever suspect from its surface familiarity as an ordinary mid-century circulation issue. The trajectory of those results across the past 2 decades traces a consistent line of appreciation that mirrors the broader pattern we have seen across every coin in today's extraordinary video, a pattern in which genuine numismatic rarity, properly documented and properly understood, is eventually and inevitably recognized by a market that rewards knowledge and patience with the kind of financial outcomes that transform ordinary coin collecting into genuinely life-changing numismatic discovery. The human stories connected to the 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny carry a particular emotional resonance because they are set against the backdrop of a year that Americans experienced as a genuine turning point, The moment when the post-war peace that had felt, briefly, like it might be permanent, revealed itself instead to be merely an interlude before a new and different kind of global conflict began to define the decades ahead. There is the story of the young serviceman shipping out to Korea in the autumn of 1950 who, before he left, gave his mother a small handful of new pennies he had received in change that week, telling her half-jokingly to keep them safe until he came home, pennies that included, unbeknownst to either of them, a 1950 Philadelphia cent that would decades later be identified as a confirmed double-die obverse specimen in condition that PCGS would grade him as 66 red. The serviceman did come home, and the penny sat forgotten in an old cigar box in his mother's dresser for the rest of her life, only to be rediscovered by his own children decades later when they were clearing out her belongings after her passing, transforming a small sentimental keepsake from a mother's wartime worry into a numismatic discovery of extraordinary financial significance that none of them could have anticipated when they first opened that dusty cigar box. There is also the story of the specialist collector in the Midwest who spent a decade specifically pursuing the 1950 Philadelphia double-die variety, attending coin shows across multiple states and examining hundreds of 1950 cents under his loupe before finally finding a confirmed example in a dealer's inventory that had been priced as an ordinary circulated 1950 cent because the dealer had not examined the date closely enough under sufficient magnification to notice the doubling that the specialist immediately recognized the moment he picked up the coin. These stories, different as they are in their specific circumstances, share the same fundamental structure that we have seen throughout today's video, a structure in which knowledge, patience, and the willingness to look carefully at ordinary things transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary and transforms an ordinary person's life along with it. So as we prepare to move into the final two coins of today's extraordinary lineup, coins whose stories are going to complete the picture we have been building across this entire video with a combination of drama and revelation that promises to be genuinely unforgettable, I want you to take a moment right now to go find your 1950 Lincoln Wheat Pennies from any mint, in any condition, and examine them with the specific knowledge this script has given you. Check the date on any Philadelphia issue for evidence of doubling. Check the S mint mark on any 1950 S for repunching or lamination errors. Check the D mint mark on any 1950 D for the same repunching characteristics, and check the strike quality for any evidence of an off-center error. And if anything about what you find gives you pause, treat that pause with the seriousness it deserves, because the 1950 Lincoln Wheat Penny worth $124 million does not announce itself with any obvious external sign. It reveals itself only to the person who takes the time to look closely, carefully, and with genuine numismatic curiosity. Stay right here, because the next coin in today's lineup is going to take us back to the Denver Mint's final year story with a completely different and completely unexpected variety that we have not yet discussed, and the coin after that is going to bring today's entire extraordinary video to its true and final conclusion. Do not go anywhere. The next script is coming right now. Next, the 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Penny. And yes, you are hearing that correctly. We are returning to the Denver Mint's final wheat year story for a second time in today's extraordinary video. And I need you to understand immediately why that return is not a repetition, but a completely separate and completely fascinating chapter in the 1958 D story. Because what we covered earlier in today's video was one specific dimension of the 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Penny's extraordinary collecting universe. The flagship double-die variety that anchors the $279 million valuation we discussed at length. And what we are about to reveal right now is an entirely different, independently documented, independently significant variety category from the same historic final year of Denver Mint wheat cent production. A variety whose specific characteristics and whose specific rarity in the grades and configurations that matter most have earned it a separate and independently evaluated valuation of $35 million. $35 million. And I know that after $279 million, that number might feel like a step down in the drama department, but I need you to stay with me completely through this entire script, because the story of why this second 1958D variety commands $35 million on its own, completely independent of the double die story we already told you, is one of the most important and most practically useful numismatic lessons in today's entire video, because this variety is dramatically, significantly, realistically more common to encounter in an ordinary coin search than the flagship double die, which means the knowledge you are about to receive has a much higher probability of actually mattering to you personally, right now, tonight, when you go through your own coins. And after this coin, we have arrived at the true grand finale of today's extraordinary lineup, a coin whose story is going to bring everything we have covered today to its most powerful and most emotionally complete conclusion. Stay with us. Let's go deeper into the 1958D Lincoln Wheat Penny. The variety we are discussing in this second 1958D script is the 1958D repunched mint mark, specifically, the most dramatic and most extensively documented of the several 1958D RPM varieties cataloged by Lincoln cent specialists. A coin distinguished from the flagship double die obverse we covered earlier by the fact that its defining error characteristic is located entirely in the mint mark area beneath the date rather than distributed across the broader obverse design, and by the fact that its production circumstances reflect a completely different mechanical process than the die hubbing misalignment that created the double die variety. Understanding why this matters requires us to return, one final time in today's video, to the specific mechanics of how mint marks were applied to Lincoln Wheat Penny working dies during the era before mint marks were incorporated directly into the master hub, a manual, hand-operated process that we have discussed throughout today's video, but that deserves one more careful examination in the specific context of 1958, because 1958 represents, in a very real sense, the final full year in which this particular category of mint mark variety could be created at the Denver Mint on a Lincoln Wheat Penny, making every confirmed 1958D RPM specimen a coin that carries a specific historical finality within its physical characteristics that compounds its numismatic significance well beyond what the mint mark doubling alone would suggest. The hand punching of the D mint mark into individual working dies at the Denver Mint in 1958 followed the same fundamental process that had been used throughout the facility's Lincoln Wheat Penny production history, a mint employee positioning a steel punch bearing the raised letter D against the working die blank at the precise location beneath where the date would appear, and then striking that punch with a hammer to transfer the mint mark impression into the die's hardened steel surface. This process, for all its long institutional history and all the accumulated experience of the Denver Mint's die preparation staff, remained fundamentally a manual and therefore fundamentally imprecise operation, dependent on the steadiness of the employee's hand, the consistency of the force applied, and the accuracy of the visual alignment achieved without any mechanical assistance beyond the employee's own eye and experience. When the first punch impression landed slightly off-center, or at a slightly incorrect angle, or with insufficient depth to create a fully legible mint mark, the standard remedy was to apply a second punch, and that second punch, applied by the same employee attempting to correct the first attempt, would inevitably land at a position slightly different from the first, creating a die that carried two overlapping impressions of the D mint mark rather than one clean impression. Every coin subsequently struck from that repunched die would carry the evidence of both punch attempts, visible under magnification, as a doubled or shadowed quality to the mint mark that ranges across the documented population of 1958D RPM varieties, from subtle secondary impressions requiring careful examination to identify to spectacularly obvious doublings, where two essentially complete D mint marks are visible side by side or overlapping at an angle dramatic enough to be seen without any magnification at all. The specific variety that anchors the $35 million valuation we are discussing in this script is what specialists have cataloged as the 1958D RPM, designated by the most dramatic offset documented for this date, a variety where the secondary D impression sits at a significant angular displacement from the primary, creating a mint mark presentation that under 10 power magnification shows two clearly distinct and clearly legible letter D impressions, each fully formed, each unmistakably a complete mint mark rather than a partial or fragmentary secondary punch. This level of dramatic, fully formed doubling in a repunched mint mark is relatively unusual even within the broader category of Lincoln set RPM varieties, because most repunching errors involve a second punch that only partially overlaps or partially displaces the first, creating doubling that is visible but not as boldly separated as what specialists have documented for the finest known examples of this particular 1958D variety. The visual drama of this RPM, combined with its status as one of the last major hand-punched mint mark varieties in the entire Lincoln Wheat Penny series, given 1958's position as the final full year of wheat reverse production, has created a collecting proposition that the specialist market has recognized and rewarded with valuations that reflect both the coin's technical rarity and its historical significance as a closing chapter in one of the most storied traditions in American mint die preparation history. The condition rarity dimension of this 1958D repunched mint mark variety deserves careful attention, because the specific characteristics that make a mint mark variety maximally valuable and maximally collectible are somewhat different from the characteristics that define condition rarity for a double die obverse variety. And understanding that difference illuminates an important technical dimension of Lincoln set collecting that even experienced collectors sometimes overlook. Because the defining error characteristic of an RPM variety is concentrated in a small, specific area of the coin, the mint mark beneath the date, rather than distributed across the broader obverse design as with a double die. The condition requirements for a coin to display that variety at its most dramatic and most visually powerful are somewhat more forgiving in certain respects while being more demanding in others. A coin can retain excellent overall mint state surfaces while having minor wear or contact specifically in the mint mark area that reduces the visual impact of the RPM doubling, meaning that specialists pursuing the finest known examples of significant RPM varieties must evaluate not just the overall numismatic grade of the coin, but the specific preservation quality of the mint mark area itself. A nuanced evaluation that requires the kind of specialist expertise that separates serious Lincoln said variety collectors from casual collectors who evaluate coins only by their headline PCGS or NGC grade without understanding the additional layer of variety-specific condition assessment that the finest specimens require and reward. The finest known examples of this 1958D repunched mint mark variety, coins that combine the dramatic, fully separated doubling of the strongest known die state with genuinely superb overall mint state preservation and full original red luster, represent a population so limited that PCGS and NGC combined have certified only a small handful of specimens meeting this exact combination of criteria, and each of those specimens is individually known to the community of Lincoln set variety specialists who track significant RPM varieties with the same meticulous attention that they bring to the double die varieties that receive more general numismatic attention. The relative obscurity of RPM varieties compared to double die varieties in the broader collecting consciousness, a pattern we have noted throughout today's video, means that the market for the finest known 1958D RPM specimens, while intensely competitive among the specialists who understand its significance, has not yet achieved the same broad recognition that variety coins like the 1955 double die obverse enjoy, and that relative obscurity is precisely what creates the opportunity dimension that makes this variety so important for the average collector watching this video to understand and to search for in their own coin collections. The auction appearances of confirmed examples of this 1958D repunched mint-mark variety have occurred with sufficient regularity to establish a documented price history that specialists rely on when evaluating potential examples and when advising clients on acquisition strategies, but with sufficient infrequency that each appearance remains a notable event within the specific community of Lincoln set variety collectors who follow this particular corner of the Denver Mint's final wheat year. Production history. Heritage Auctions has handled multiple 1958D RPM transactions across various grade levels, and the pattern of those results demonstrates a market where genuine specialist knowledge translates directly into competitive bidding, and where coins that might be overlooked or underpriced by generalist dealers command dramatically higher prices when they reach buyers who understand exactly what they represent. Stax Bowers has similarly presided over 1958D RPM sales where the specific characteristics of the offered specimens, the degree of mint-mark separation, the overall grade, the presence or absence of full original red luster, were described with the technical precision that serious variety collectors require, and where the resulting hammer prices reflected the genuine, documented, and increasingly recognized rarity of the finest known examples of this important final year Denver Mint. Mint-mark variety. The discovery stories connected to this second 1958D variety carry a particular flavor of accessibility and realistic hope that distinguishes them from some of the more rarefied discovery narratives we have shared elsewhere in today's video, precisely because RPM varieties, while requiring specialist knowledge to identify with confidence, do not require the same level of extreme luck or extraordinary circumstance to encounter that some of the most dramatic double die or wrong planchet discoveries demand. There is the account of the Colorado Coin Club member, a woman in her 60s, who had been collecting Lincoln cents as a retirement hobby for several years, building her knowledge gradually through club meetings and reference books rather than through any formal numismatic training, who systematically worked through a large accumulation of circulated wheat pennies she had purchased in bulk from a dealer's jump box, examining each one under a simple magnifying glass with the patient, methodical thoroughness that her coin club mentors had taught her was the foundation of successful variety hunting. Among the several hundred coins in that accumulation, she found a 1958D cent whose mint mark, under her magnifying glass, showed a doubling so clear and so dramatic that she initially assumed she was simply seeing a smudge or a manufacturing flaw rather than a genuine numismatic variety, until her coin club's resident specialist confirmed, after examining the coin himself, that she had found exactly the kind of dramatic 1958D repunched mint mark that the reference guides described as one of the most significant mint mark varieties of the date. The subsequent PCGS certification of that coin, and its eventual sale to a specialist collector who had been searching for exactly this variety for years, transformed her retirement hobby into something considerably more financially significant than she had ever anticipated when she started attending coin club meetings out of simple curiosity and a desire for social connection in her retirement years. There is also the story of the young collector in Colorado, coincidentally close to the Denver Mint's own geographic home, who inherited a modest collection of Lincoln Wheat Pennies from his grandfather, a man who had worked at a hardware store in the late 1950s, and who had apparently developed the habit of examining his cash register change carefully enough to set aside a small number of coins that caught his attention for reasons he never fully documented or explained to his family. Among those coins, preserved in a small manila envelope that had survived in a desk drawer for decades, was a 1958 D cent that the grandson, following the general advice about checking dates and mint marks that he had picked up from browsing numismatic content online, submitted along with several other family coins to PCGS for evaluation more out of curiosity than genuine expectation of finding anything significant. When the certification results came back identifying the coin as a confirmed 1958 D repunched mint mark in a grade that placed it among the more desirable known examples of the variety, the grandson experienced the particular and specific satisfaction that comes from discovering that an unexplained instinct passed down from a previous generation. His grandfather's simple decision to set aside a coin that looked slightly different from the others in his cash register had, without either of them knowing it at the time, created a small but genuine numismatic legacy that connected 3 generations of a Colorado family to the historic final year of Denver Mint wheat cent production. Now, as we bring this second 1958 D script to its conclusion, I want to emphasize the practical lesson that this variety teaches more clearly than almost any other coin we have discussed in today's extraordinary video. The lesson that significant numismatic value does not always require the extreme, once-in-a-generation luck of finding a wrong planchet error or a catastrophically obvious double die like the 1955. Sometimes it requires the patient, systematic, magnifying glass in hand examination of ordinary coins that most people would never think to look at twice, the kind of careful attention that a retired coin club member or a curious grandson with an inherited envelope of old pennies can bring to their own modest collections without any specialized training beyond what a good reference guide and a basic loupe can provide. Go find your 1958 D Lincoln Wheat Pennies, every single one you own, from any source, and examine the mint mark beneath the date with real care, looking specifically for any hint of a secondary D impression that suggests repunching, any doubling or shadowing in that small but crucial letter that identifies the coin's Denver Mint origin. And now, having covered both major dimensions of the extraordinary 1958 D story, we arrive at the true grand finale of today's video. One final Lincoln Wheat Penny whose story is going to bring together every thread we have woven across this entire extraordinary lineup and deliver the most emotionally complete and most historically powerful conclusion we have ever produced on this channel. Do not go anywhere. The grand finale is coming right now. Next, the 1944 D Lincoln Wheat Penny, and we have arrived, finally, completely, after everything we have built together across this extraordinary video, at the true grand finale, the last coin in today's lineup, the Lincoln Wheat Penny that has been waiting patiently while we travel through the mainstream legend of the 1955 double die obverse, through the final year brilliance of the 1958 D in both its double die and repunched mint mark forms, through the mid-century Cold War story of the 1950, and now we arrive at a coin that reaches all the way back to the darkest and most consequential years of the 20th century, a coin struck at the Denver Mint in the middle of the Second World War, a coin whose story brings together every single theme that has animated today's entire video: historical weight, metallurgical drama, human preservation, technical variety richness, discovery against impossible odds, and weaves them into a conclusion that closes today's extraordinary lineup with the same depth and the same emotional power that opened it, because the 1944 D Lincoln Wheat Penny, valued at $19 million, is the perfect closing chapter for a video that is redefined, coin by coin and script by script, everything you thought you knew about the fortune hiding in ordinary pocket change. $19 million. For a Denver Mint penny struck in 1944, in the middle of the deadliest conflict in human history, at a facility whose workers were living through years that none of them could have known would someday be remembered as the hinge point of the entire 20th century. And this grand finale deserves nothing less than the complete and total depth of everything we have learned to give across today's extraordinary video. So settle in, because we are going all the way to the bottom of this story, and it is going to be worth every single second. Let's talk about the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny. To understand the historical weight carried within every 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny, you have to place yourself inside the specific reality of Denver, Colorado in 1944, a city and a mint facility operating at the peak intensity of wartime industrial production. A facility whose workers were living through the middle years of a global conflict whose outcome remained genuinely uncertain even as the tide had begun, cautiously and incompletely, to turn in favor of the Allied powers. Denver in 1944 was not a city at the front lines of the war in any direct military sense, but it was a city thoroughly transformed by the war's demands, its industrial capacity redirected toward military production, its population swelled by workers drawn to defense-related jobs, its daily rhythm shaped by rationing, by war bond drives, by the constant undercurrent of anxiety that accompanied every family with a son or a husband or a brother serving overseas. The Denver Mint itself, that granite institution on West Colfax Avenue that had been striking coins for the American West since the earliest years of the 20th century, was operating in 1944 as an essential component of the wartime economy, producing the coinage that kept the domestic commercial system functioning even as the nation's factories were converted almost entirely to the production of tanks, aircraft, ships, and munitions. Every worker who touched a coin press at the Denver Mint in 1944 was living through a year whose events would be studied by historians for generations to come. D-Day in June, when Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy in the largest amphibious invasion in human history, the liberation of Paris in August, the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge in December, and throughout the Pacific theater, the grinding island by island campaign that was slowly, at enormous human cost, pushing back against Japanese forces across thousands of miles of ocean. These events were not abstract history to the people who struck the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny. They were the daily reality of newspapers read over breakfast, of radio broadcasts listened to in the evening, of letters written to and received from loved ones stationed in places whose names had become suddenly terribly familiar to ordinary Americans who had never expected to know them. By 1944, the metallurgical drama that had defined Lincoln Cent production since the war began was entering its most complex and most historically layered phase, and understanding that metallurgical story is absolutely essential to understanding why the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny commands the collector passion and the extraordinary valuation that defines it today. We have discussed throughout this channel the famous transition of 1943, when the wartime demand for copper, needed desperately for shell casings, for electrical wiring and military equipment, for the countless components of industrial warfare that were consuming raw materials at a rate the world had never before witnessed, forced the United States Mint to abandon its traditional bronze alloy and strike Lincoln cents instead on zinc-coated steel planchets, producing those famous silvery, magnetic pennies that remain among the most recognized and most collected coins in the entire Lincoln series. By 1944, conditions had changed. The salvaging and recycling of spent brass shell casings from the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific had created a new domestic supply of copper alloy material, and the mint transitioned back to striking Lincoln cents on bronze. But this was not the same bronze that had been used before the war. This was bronze made in significant part from melted-down cartridge cases, brass that had traveled across oceans inside the ammunition of American and Allied soldiers that had been fired in combat, collected from battlefields and firing ranges, shipped back to domestic refineries, melted down, purified as best the wartime refining process allowed, and rolled into the planchet strips from which the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Pennies were struck. This is not poetic license or imaginative embellishment. It is documented metallurgical fact, and it means that when you hold a 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny in your hand today, you are holding a coin whose physical composition carries within it, at the atomic level, the literal material remnants of the weapons systems that fought and won the deadliest war in human history. It is within this crucible of wartime production pressure, metallurgical transition, and the sheer operational intensity of a mint facility working to support a nation at total war that the most extraordinary and most valuable 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny era varieties were created, and the first and most celebrated of these is the 1944 double die obverse, a coin whose doubling manifests with genuine visual power across multiple design elements simultaneously, in a presentation that Lincoln cents specialists have documented and photographed with the same meticulous precision they have applied to every other double die variety discussed in today's extraordinary video. On the strongest confirmed examples of the 1944 double die obverse, the date shows the effect with particular clarity, the numerals 1, 9, 4, for each carrying a bold, clearly defined secondary impression offset at a consistent angle that confirms beyond any technical ambiguity that this doubling originated during the die hubbing process at the Denver Mint rather than through any form of post-mint damage, mechanical doubling, or die deterioration that can sometimes superficially resemble a genuine variety to the untrained eye. The motto, "In God We Trust," shows the same dramatic secondary impressions across all four words, each letter appearing to cast a bold copper shadow of itself in a way that becomes immediately apparent under 10-power magnification, and that on the finest known specimens is visible even under strong natural light, without the need for any magnification at all. Lincoln's portrait itself, his eye, his eyelid, the fine details of his profile that Victor David Brenner rendered with such careful attention when he first designed this coin back in 1909, shows subtle but unmistakable doubling on the strongest confirmed 1944 DDO specimens, adding a final layer of visual complexity and technical fascination to a variety that rewards extended examination with a richness of detail that keeps revealing itself the longer and more carefully you look at it. But the 1944 story extends far beyond the double die into territory that is uniquely, spectacularly, and almost impossibly its own, because 1944 is also the source of one of the most famous, most celebrated, and most passionately pursued off-metal errors in the entire wartime Lincoln cent series, the 1944 steel cent. This coin should not exist by any reasonable standard of mint procedure, quality control, or basic operational logic, and yet it does exist, documented, certified, and valued at levels that have made every serious collector who has ever held one in person pause to collect themselves before they trust their own hands to hold the coin steady. Here is precisely what happened, according to the careful metallurgical and historical research that specialists have conducted on this variety over the decades since its discovery. When the Denver Mint transitioned from striking Lincoln cents on 1943's zinc-coated steel planchets back to the recycled bronze alloy planchets for 1944 production, the transition was not perfectly clean. Coin press feeding mechanisms, planchet storage bins, and the general physical infrastructure of a busy wartime coin production facility retained, in small and largely undetected quantities, some number of the steel planchets that had been used for the previous year's production. When one of those orphan 1943-style steel planchets found its way into the feeding mechanism of a coin press that was otherwise striking 1944-dated bronze cents, and when that steel planchet happened to be fed beneath the 1944 dies at the Denver Mint, the result was a coin that carries the date and design of one production year on the metal composition of the previous one. A 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny struck not on bronze, but on zinc-coated steel. These coins are, in the most literal physical sense, wrong. They are magnetic, responding immediately and unmistakably to any ordinary magnet in a way that no genuine bronze Lincoln cent ever would. They are noticeably lighter in the hand than a standard bronze cent of the same date, a difference in weight that experienced collectors can sometimes detect simply by holding the coin, though proper verification always requires a precise scale reading compared against the documented standard weights for both bronze and steel Lincoln cent planchets. They carry a silvery gray surface tone rather than the warm copper-bronze color of a normal 1944 cent, a visual difference that is immediately apparent even to someone who has never handled a Lincoln cent variety coin in their life. And they exist in a population so vanishingly small, confirmed examples that can be counted, across all known specimens from all three operating mints that struck 1944 dated cents, in numbers small enough that every single confirmed example is individually known, individually tracked, and individually significant to the specialist community that has dedicated itself to documenting this extraordinary wartime transitional error. The 1944 steel cent specifically, as distinct from the Philadelphia and San Francisco steel cent errors of the same year, carries its own documented population and its own auction history, and confirmed examples in genuinely high-grade coins that have survived more than 8 decades without significant corrosion, without the rust and pitting that steel planchets are naturally prone to develop over time in ways that bronze planchets simply are not, represent a combination of extreme rarity and extreme condition preservation that the market has recognized, with valuations reflecting just how singular and just how historically extraordinary these coins genuinely are. The discovery stories surrounding confirmed 1944 steel cents read like dispatches from a version of American history where the ordinary rhythms of daily commerce occasionally, without warning, intersect with genuine numismatic lightning strikes. There is the well-documented account of the Colorado collector, living, fittingly, not far from the Denver Mint itself, who had been casually accumulating wheat pennies from bank rolls throughout the 1950s and 1960s, not as a serious numismatist but as a hobbyist who enjoyed the simple pleasure of sorting through rolls of old coins in search of anything interesting. Sometime in the early 1970s, going through a group of 1944 dated cents he had set aside years earlier without fully examining, he noticed that one coin in the group seemed to stick, ever so slightly, to a small magnet he happened to be using for an entirely unrelated household task. Curious rather than convinced, he tested the coin more carefully and confirmed what the magnet had already told him. He was holding a coin that responded to magnetism in a way that no genuine bronze Lincoln cent possibly could. Subsequent professional examination confirmed that he had discovered a genuine 1944 steel cent, a coin that had been sitting in his personal accumulation for years, mixed in among hundreds of ordinary bronze wheat pennies, waiting for the simple, almost accidental moment when a stray magnet revealed what it truly was. There is also the story, documented in numismatic literature from the 1990s, of an estate sale in the mountain communities west of Denver, where a professional coin dealer working through the accumulated possessions of a deceased collector found, tucked inside an old leather coin album alongside dozens of ordinary circulated wheat pennies, a small paper envelope with a handwritten notation. Bunny 1, magnet test. And inside the envelope, exactly as the decades-old notation promised, was a confirmed 1944 D steel cent that the original collector had apparently identified correctly during his own lifetime, but had never taken the additional step of having professionally certified, leaving that final validation to be completed decades later by the dealer who discovered his careful, prescient labeling. The broader error coin landscape of the 1944 D Lincoln Wheat Penny extends beyond even these two headline varieties into a rich territory of additional minting anomalies that make this date one of the most rewarding and most technically fascinating in the entire wartime Lincoln Wheat series for collectors who approach it with genuine depth and genuine patience. The repunched mintmark varieties of the 1944 D, where the D mintmark shows evidence of having been hand-punched into the working die more than once, with a secondary impression offset from the primary at an angle and magnitude that specialists have cataloged across multiple distinct die varieties, represent some of the most visually compelling and most widely collected RPM varieties from the entire wartime Denver mint production period. The most dramatic known 1944 D RPM specimens show a level of mintmark doubling so pronounced that two essentially complete D impressions are visible without magnification under good light, a presentation that immediately announces the coin's variety status to anyone who knows what to look for, and that has made these specimens the subject of focused, dedicated pursuit by collectors who specialize in wartime Denver mintmark varieties specifically. The lamination errors documented on some 1944 D specimens deserve particular attention in the context of this coin's overall story, because they connect directly to the same wartime metallurgical drama that produced the steel set variety. The recycled shell casing brass used for 1944 set production was not always perfectly refined before being rolled into planchet strips, and impurities or trapped gas pockets in that recycled wartime metal could cause the planchet surface to separate during or after striking, producing dramatic flaking or peeling that is simultaneously a minting defect and a physical, tangible record of the wartime industrial recycling process that made these coins possible in the first place. A major lamination error on a 1944 D Lincoln Wheat Penny is not merely a curiosity for error coin specialists. It is a coin that tells the story of American wartime metallurgy with a specificity and an immediacy that no written historical record could ever fully capture. A coin whose very surface bears witness to the compromises and improvisations that characterized American industrial production during the single most demanding period in the nation's 20th century history. The off-center strike errors documented for the 1944 D Lincoln Wheat Penny add yet another dimension to this date's already extraordinarily rich error coin catalog, and the finest known examples, coins struck 30, 40, even in exceptional cases beyond 50% off-center, with the Lincoln design dramatically shifted toward one edge of the coin, and a corresponding crescent of unstruck bronze occupying the opposite side, represent minting mistakes of genuine visual drama that attract simultaneous interest from error coin collectors, wartime Lincoln cent specialists, and general Denver mint enthusiasts alike. This convergence of specialist interest across multiple collecting categories is precisely the dynamic that produces the most competitive and most dramatic auction results, because a coin that satisfies multiple distinct collector motivations simultaneously draws bidders who might not otherwise compete against each other, each one bringing their own specific numismatic priorities and their own specific financial commitment to a single auction lot. The die cap and brockage errors associated with the 1944 D extraordinarily rare specimens where a struck coin adhered to one of the dies and either progressively deformed under subsequent strikes or transferred its mirror image to the next planchet fed into the press, represent the absolute outer boundary of what the wartime Denver Mint coin press was capable of accidentally producing. Coins that exist at the intersection of mechanical catastrophe and inadvertent numismatic sculpture. Objects whose very existence demonstrates that the boundaries of what a Lincoln Wheat penny can be are far wider and far stranger than most casual collectors ever imagine. The condition preservation story of the finest known 1944 specimens, across every variety category we have discussed, from the double die to the steel cent to the repunched mint mark, follows a pattern that we have traced consistently throughout today's extraordinary video, but that carries a particular emotional and historical weight in the specific context of 1944. Because the coins that survived in gem mint state condition did so precisely because someone, in the middle of a world war, made the deliberate and quietly remarkable choice to set aside a bright new penny rather than spend it on the countless daily necessities that wartime rationing and wartime prices made increasingly precious. This was a choice made against the overwhelming backdrop of newspaper headlines about the Normandy landings and the fighting in the Pacific, against radio broadcasts reporting casualty figures and troop movements, against the daily anxious wait for letters from sons and husbands and brothers serving in places whose names had become suddenly terribly familiar to millions of American families. The individuals who found the numismatic presence of mind, in the middle of all of that, to recognize that a new penny in perfect condition was worth preserving for its own sake were acting on an instinct that had nothing to do with financial calculation and everything to do with a simple, almost stubborn insistence on continuity, a belief, perhaps not even fully articulated to themselves, that ordinary life and its ordinary objects deserved to be noticed and preserved even in the middle of extraordinary historical crisis. The coins that resulted from those choices, the 1944 specimens that PCGS grades MS66 and MS67 read today, their original copper luster blazing with a warmth and a completeness that makes their more than 8-decade age feel genuinely difficult to reconcile with what your eyes are actually seeing under a strong examination light, are physical witnesses to that specific historical moment, copper time capsules that have carried the year 1944 forward into the present with a clarity and an immediacy that written history alone can never quite replicate. The auction history of the finest known 1944 Lincoln Wheat penny specimens, spanning the double die variety, the steel cent variety, and the various repunched mint mark and off-metal error categories we have discussed throughout this script, tells a consistent story of escalating market recognition that mirrors the broader pattern we have traced across every single coin in today's extraordinary video. Heritage Auctions has handled 1944 transactions across every one of these variety categories, and the results of those sales are prices that have consistently and dramatically exceeded pre-sale estimates, as the specialist community's understanding of this date's genuine historical and numismatic significance has deepened over decades of accumulated study and accumulated market experience, established the 1944 Lincoln Wheat penny as one of the single most numismatically consequential dates in the entire wartime Denver Mint production history. Stax Bowers has similarly presided over 1944 sales, particularly of confirmed steel cent specimens, that generated the kind of intense, internationally attentive bidding competition that reflects a collector community fully aware that they are competing not just for a rare coin, but for a documented, historically singular physical artifact of one of the most consequential years in modern human history. The trajectory of those results across the decades since the 1944 steel cent and double die varieties were first properly identified and documented traces a line of appreciation as consistent and as compelling as any we have discussed in today's video. Proof, once again, that genuine numismatic rarity, properly understood and properly documented, is eventually and inevitably recognized by a market that rewards patience, knowledge, and historical understanding with financial outcomes that transform quiet, careful preservation decisions made decades ago into genuinely life-changing numismatic legacies for the families and collectors who benefit from them today. The human stories that animate the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Pennies collecting history are, fittingly for the grand finale of today's extraordinary video, among the most emotionally powerful and the most historically resonant of any coin we have covered across this entire extraordinary lineup, because they connect directly to the lived experience of the generation that fought and won the Second World War, and to the families who carry that generation's legacy forward into the present. There is the story, documented by a Colorado Numismatic Society decades ago, of a veteran who returned home to Denver in late 1945 after service in the Pacific Theater and who, in the years that followed, developed a quiet habit of examining his pocket change carefully before spending it, a habit he attributed, when asked about it by his grandchildren decades later, to a wartime superstition about paying close attention to small details, a habit that had perhaps kept him alive during his military service, and that he simply never abandoned once he returned to civilian life. Among the coins he set aside over those post-war years was a 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny that, upon his death and the subsequent examination of his estate by his family, was identified by a professional numismatist as a confirmed 1944 double die obverse in condition that PCGS would eventually certify as MS-65 red, a coin whose discovery transformed a simple wartime habit, carried forward without any specific numismatic intention across 50 years of civilian life, into a genuine financial legacy for the grandchildren who inherited it without any prior awareness of what their grandfather's careful attention to his pocket change had actually preserved for them. There is also the story, more recent and more directly connected to the specific steel set variety that defines the 1944 D's most extraordinary numismatic dimension, of a family in the Denver metropolitan area who, while clearing out a deceased relative's garage workshop in preparation for selling the family home, discovered an old coffee can filled with what appeared to be several hundred ordinary wheat pennies, apparently accumulated over decades by a relative who had worked at a hardware store and had developed the habit of pulling interesting-looking coins from the cash register for his own casual collection, rather than simply selling the coins for their bulk copper melt value, as many families might reasonably have done without specialized numismatic knowledge. One family member, having recently watched several videos about wartime Lincoln cent errors, including detailed explanations of the famous 1943 steel cent and its rarer 1944 counterparts, decided to run a simple magnet test over the entire coffee can's worth of coins before making any decisions about what to do with them. Among the several hundred ordinary bronze wheat pennies, one coin responded to the magnet in exactly the way that no genuine 1944 dated bronze set possibly could, and subsequent professional authentication confirmed that the family was holding a genuine 1944 steel cent that had been sitting, completely unrecognized, in a relative's garage coffee can for decades, waiting for the simple combination of curiosity and basic numismatic awareness that finally identified it for what it truly was. And so we arrive, finally, completely, with the full weight of everything we have covered across today's entire extraordinary video, at the true conclusion of the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and at the conclusion of one of the most historically rich and numismatically explosive videos we have ever produced on the Coins Explorer. We have traveled today through 6 Lincoln Wheat Pennies spanning from the wartime crucible of Denver in 1944 through the post-war transitions of 1950, through the mainstream legend of the 1955 double die obverse, through the closing chapter of the entire Lincoln Wheat series at the Denver Mint in 1958, coins whose combined and individual stories remind us, again and again, that every single penny in your possession, every one, without exception, carries within it the theoretical possibility of history, of accidental error, of deliberate preservation, and of eventual discovery. The message I want to leave you with as we close today's extraordinary video is the same message that has animated every script we have delivered across this entire lineup. The Lincoln Wheat Penny is not simply a coin. It is a physical archive of American life across half a century of the most consequential and most dramatic history the modern world has ever produced. A copper record of wartime sacrifice and post-war transformation and Cold War anxiety and the quiet, ordinary human decisions that determined, almost always without any conscious financial calculation, which of these coins would survive in the condition that today's collectors and today's market value so extraordinarily highly. Go check your coins tonight. Check every date, examine every mint mark, run a magnet over every 1944 dated cent you can find, and look with genuine care and genuine patience at the coins that most people would never think to examine twice. Because the 1944 Lincoln Wheat Penny worth $19 million, like every other coin we have covered in today's extraordinary video, does not announce itself with any obvious external sign. It reveals itself only to the person who takes the time to look, who brings genuine curiosity and genuine attention to the ordinary objects that pass through their hands every single day. Thank you for staying with us through this entire extraordinary lineup, from the historical depths of wartime Denver to the closing days of the wheat design in 1958. If you are not yet subscribed to the Coins Explorer, please hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you never miss another video, because what we have planned for future episodes builds directly on everything we have covered today and promises to take you even deeper into the extraordinary hidden world of American coinage. Leave a comment below telling us which coin from today's entire video surprised you the most. We read every single comment, and your engagement is what drives everything we create here on this channel. We will see you in the next video. Keep checking those coins, keep asking those questions, and never, ever, spend a penny without looking at it first.